The Valley of the Kings is the most magnificent burial ground in the world. 62 tombs cut deep into the rock, overflowing with the treasures of ancient Egypt. Pharaohs like Tutankhamun and Ramesses the Great were laid to rest here. But before long, this remote valley would become a haven for treasure hunters. Tomb raiders and vandals would break into the secret underground world. They were followed centuries later by European explorers and adventure-seeking treasure hunters like Belzoni. Then, archaeologists like Howard Carter would make breathtaking discoveries and begin to piece together the lives of the pharaohs. The oldest tomb in the valley belonged to the king Thutmose I from the 16th century BC.
Probably this was chosen as a site for it because of this cleft, which made it easier to begin the cutting of the tomb itself. Hidden tombs were the goals for these early kings.
For the next 500 years, the pharaohs would follow Thutmose I and be buried here in the valley. Ted Brock has been responsible for creating a three-dimensional map of the entire valley and knows every tomb.
Building a tomb was probably in many ways quite similar to quarrying operations that they were carrying out for hundreds or even thousands of years. And so it was a similar process of cutting into the rock, cutting out pieces of rock and removing it.
It was hot, dirty, and dangerous work.
So they'd have groups of people working there, cutting away at the rock face, tunneling in and hauling the debris away. And behind them would be the finishers coming along with the copper and bronze tools, smoothing down the walls, truing them up, and then followed up by the people plastering the walls in preparation for the decoration. So you had all these various steps going on at the same time. The tombs were decorated with these descriptions of the underworld. It was taking this hole in the rock and making it the underworld itself.
Most of the tombs in the Valley of the Kings are unfinished, the work cut short by the king's death. But the tomb of Seti I is virtually complete. It was unearthed by the famous treasure hunter Giovanni Battista Belzoni, who in 1817 was lucky enough to chance upon the longest and deepest of all the tombs. Belzoni described finding it as the best day in his life. But it wasn't all easy. Once inside, the main chambers were hidden behind a false wall, and in front of this was a well pit 10 meters deep.
He found as he came in that the rear wall was blocked up, except there was a hole which earlier tomb robbers had entered.
Having discovered the secret entrance, Belzoni went on to explore one of the most cavernous tombs ever found. The lowest chamber of all, several hundred feet down in the rock, was where the pharaoh was laid to rest.
This is the burial chamber of Seti I. It's really like a giant sarcophagus with a lid representing the starry sky, and the walls describing the sun god's journey through the underworld. And each end of the walls has the protective goddess as found on a sarcophagus.
Here the pharaoh would rest, sealed in state and surrounded by his finest and most valued possessions. The priest and burial party would seal the chamber. But the generations of workers would always be able to remember where each tomb was. And soon, robbers learned where the tombs were. So a royal seal was put over the door lock, But this didn't deter thieves either.
If the central government system was weak and people weren't getting their daily pay and rations, there was a great temptation to go and plunder these tombs.
When the new kingdom ended, the tombs were abandoned, many stripped of their treasures. Some became shrines, others became hidden. Some may remain undiscovered. But the new kingdom of ancient Egypt left behind far more wonders than tombs alone. The desire for greatness led some pharaohs to immortalize their grandeur in vast temples. The most splendid of these was built by the pharaoh Hatshepsut. Like many pharaohs, Hatshepsut liked to be remembered as a great leader and warrior. What was unusual was that Hatshepsut was a woman. Built over the hillside from the Valley of the Kings, the Temple of Queen Hatshepsut is the most impressive monument of Western Thebes. Hatshepsut's futuristic temple is packed with revolutionary features. A fitting memory to one of Egypt's most innovative pharaohs. Yet unlike Cleopatra or Nefertiti, the story of Hatshepsut's remarkable life is little known.
She actually led armies in battle, and this was something that early historians really didn't want to have to accept. She gave orders and Egypt bowed their head. It did as it was told.
Hatshepsut was the eldest daughter of Thutmose I. And when her husband Thutmose II died, her young stepson became pharaoh, Thutmose III. Worried that the boy might lose control, Hatshepsut appointed herself as co-regent and later king.
There is no doubt that when she took the throne, she was acting unconstitutionally. But she didn't do as other ambitious women would have done and got rid of Thutmose III. He's always there. The thing is, she's the leader.
Hatshepsut set out to finish what her husband Thutmose II had started. A splendid mortuary temple. Under her control, it would take 15 years to become the greatest architectural achievement of her dynasty. Hatshepsut chose as her architect a man called Senenmut. From lowly status, Senenmut had risen up the ranks to become Hatshepsut's most trusted companion.
He was chief of her works. He would have been trained on how to choose a site and then to plan the work and then to manage the work as it goes along.
Senenmut copied the ramp design from an adjacent temple complex. But he added other features. On the colonnades, he placed statues to the god Osiris in front of square columns. And at the back of the temple was a unique structure built to withstand the weight of the cliff above it.
This is the innermost sanctuary, and it's constructed in a rather extraordinary way. What they have done is to make a corbelled vault, as we call it, and this is putting one stone on top of another stone and moving closer and closer and closer to the ceiling. And then all those little corners are shaved off on either side, so what you're looking at appears to be a barrel vault.
Hatshepsut illustrated the highlights of her reign on the walls of her temple, including the very first depiction of an expedition she organized in the 9th year of her rule.
This is the only record that we have of an African village 2,500 years ago.
Hatshepsut sent 5 ships to the land of Punt, thought to be near present-day Somalia. The purpose of the trip was to bring back the highly prized incense and perfumes to offer the god Amun at the temple.
They brought back precious woods like ebony, ivory, gold, skins, and everything else that they thought would be a delight for the god Amun. Some say also that the terraces of this particular temple were used as a place to plant these exotic trees.
Throughout the 15 years of construction, Hatshepsut worked closely with her architect, Senenmut, who became almost like family.
Senenmut was one of the favorites of Queen Hatshepsut. This man was responsible first for the upbringing, for the nursing of her only and only daughter, Nifru.
There's no evidence to suggest that Hatshepsut and Senenmut ever became lovers. But Senenmut was privileged enough to have his own tomb built beneath the forecourt of her temple. But it appears that his rivals may have been jealous of his achievements. After his death, all images of Senenmut were destroyed, but one was missed.
Here we have a line drawing of the famous Senenmut. Unfortunately, we don't know what happened to him because he disappears out of sight about the 16th year of her reign.
Senenmut remained an innovator until the very end.
The ceiling on his room is most unusual because it contains astronomical depictions, and this is the first time that such things appeared in the tombs of anybody. And Hatshepsut had them in her chapel as well.
Hatshepsut died after a long rule of 22 years, a rule when national confidence was boosted by monumental architecture. Like Senenmut, her face was erased from her monuments by later kings who thought it wrong that a woman had not only ruled, but had been a hero. Hatshepsut was buried in the Valley of the Kings. Her tomb was aligned with her temple and beyond, with vast obelisks she erected inside the Karnak temple complex. It was here where the kings of ancient Egypt competed to make their mark, creating the largest religious monument on Earth. Karnak, 2,000 years of triumph, turmoil, and tragedy. Here, the kings of Egypt destroyed the memory of their forebears to build their own destinies. This was the site where Thutmose I would make his mark of power, where Thutmose III would build on top of the shrines of his own stepmother, where the exquisite carvings of Seti I would be defaced by his own son, Ramesses the Great. This is Karnak, the largest religious complex ever constructed anywhere on Earth. How did it develop into a 250-acre site? When Thebes became the religious capital of Egypt, the Karnak temple became the seat of Amun, the state god. Karnak was soon home to over 600 priests. Its buildings spread west towards the Nile and also south. Obelisks and pylons appeared, followed by shrines and precincts. Then pylons to the east, a vast hall and giant statues. Eventually, the entire site was enclosed by a wall. Building to an enormous scale never daunted the kings of ancient Egypt. Each king set out to surpass the last.
When an ancient Egyptian came to the temple, he's likely to see the name of the latest pharaoh on the front. And a generation later, you have exactly the same thing. You rebuild, you improve, you make better.
Karnak was about rivalry and competition, and obelisks were a measure of this. Obelisks marked the first rays of the day's sunlight, and Hatshepsut made sure hers outshone her father's, Thutmose I. At 96 feet high, Hatshepsut's is the tallest surviving obelisk in Egypt. Weighing 323 tons, it was carved from one single piece of granite 400 miles away at Aswan. Here lay the highly prized granite quarries. How were the ancient Egyptians able to cut such a hard stone?
This is a piece of dolerite. It's a naturally occurring pebble. Essentially what they did is they pounded the surface with this stone, and every time they did, they took a minute fragment of the stone surface away. Working day and night in crews, they slowly but surely would have dug channels like this. So at one point, they could break it away from the living rock, put it on a boat, and take it down to wherever the obelisk was supposed to be delivered.
After the 400-mile river journey to Karnak, the chances of a mistake increased dramatically. Too much pressure in the middle, and the giant slab would snap under its own weight. But this was just the easy part. On arrival at Karnak, the giant granite block was hauled up a mound, base first. With men to maneuver and sand to do the real work, the giant stone was skillfully lowered into place. With time and enough labor, anything was possible. But then, building techniques were about to change when along came scaffolding. One king, by the name of Akhenaten, was in such a hurry to realize his ambitions, he invented new methods of construction. Under his command, stone blocks were cut to a standard size. Known as a talatat, they measured about 50 centimeters long and could be easily handled by one man.
It meant that the whole building process was freed up. An unskilled workman could easily carry the blocks right to the top of a building structure, and the whole process was much faster and cheaper.
But it didn't last. Small blocks were quick to build up, but even quicker to pull down. And the next pharaohs, Tutankhamun and Horemheb, both plundered Akhenaten's buildings, the talatat blocks becoming rubble infill for their giant pylons. So the pharaohs returned to building big. And there is one structure at Karnak that not even a giant could pull down. The vast hall was begun by the pharaoh Horemheb, continued under Seti I, and completed by his son Ramesses II in around 1220 BC. It's a forest of columns 70 feet high. How was it put together?
Ancient Egyptian temples are built using huge columns like this one, and architraves that span between them. This was one of their biggest problems, because the architrave had to support not only its own weight, but the weight of the great stone roof above.
Extraordinarily, building techniques were only moments away from solving this problem.
We always think it was the Romans who invented the arch, but the ancient Egyptians were building them over 1,000 years earlier.
But without keystones, Egyptian arches had to lean backwards to support each other. They were used only for utilitarian buildings, like these mud-arched storerooms over 3,000 years old. Undaunted, the ancient Egyptians simply carried the weight with enormous columns.
Columns became so big that their bases were built out of two stones like these, brought together with a perfect joint down the middle. They would be left rough and the whole column built on top of it.
Earth was banked up around them as they grew to 70 feet high. Bridging the gap between each capital was a vast architrave, a single block of sandstone spanning 30 feet. These could weigh up to 80 tons and had to be hauled up onto the site. These architraves were placed onto the roughly built columns. Now the stonemasons worked their way down, creating beautiful carved columns. And if a mistake was made, plaster was used to cover the cracks. Later, these relief carvings were exquisitely painted. As they worked their way down, slowly the earth mound was dug away. Ramesses II completed the hall using deep sunken outlines and buckets of plaster, changing the decorations to his own image and rewriting history. And he set out to cover Egypt in monuments to glorify his name. The most famous is his temple at Abu Simbel. Ramesses' power extended as far south as the deserts of Nubia, where he built 7 temples. The most impressive is at Abu Simbel. It was built to advertise Ramesses' ultimate power, and it would become the finest rock-cut temple in the world. gangs of masons set to work on the facade to transform a cliff face into two pairs of enormous statues of the pharaoh. Carved out of the living rock, they were to be 69 feet high. Why did Ramesses choose this remote desert as the site for his temple?
He probably built it because there was a fine piece of rock. It was located close to the Nile, and anyone coming from the south would be immediately struck by the majesty of Egypt.
Nubia was important for mining and for traders coming from the south. Lying far from Thebes, the area was free from the power of the priesthood at Karnak. And so here, Ramesses could pay less attention to the established gods and could concentrate on promoting his own image.
This temple is built far afield to celebrate the king so that he's not infringing on the territory of the god Amun. It's a little more of an egomaniac sort of thing, but he's doing it in a place where it's relatively safe.
His triumphs and achievements decorate the walls. His enemies cower before him. Syrians plead for mercy. A Libyan soldier is trampled underfoot. In the innermost sanctuary, Ramesses depicts himself beside the gods, in the middle, with Amun-Re. As twice every year the rising sun would penetrate this part of the temple and illuminate his image. The vast exterior statues were designed to be seen from miles away for all eternity. But instead, they would disappear for 2,000 years, until the treasure hunter Belzoni arrived. Once inside, he realized that 14 rooms lay behind the facade, some of them pillared and cut back some 200 feet into the rock. This was a discovery to equal the Valley of the Kings, and European tourists flocked here in droves. But in the 1960s, when the Aswan Dam was built, the temple was threatened by the rising waters of Lake Nasser. 51 nations from across the world contributed through UNESCO to save the monument. Piece by piece, the entire cliff face and temple were cut into 30-ton blocks and reassembled 200 feet up at the top of the cliff, like a giant jigsaw puzzle. Not even the waters of Lake Nasser could rise above the king who constructed his own immortality in stone. Some wonders were never constructed. They've become natural shrines and spiritual landmarks. The most famous is Mount Sinai. At 7,000 feet high, Mount Sinai, known locally as Jebel Musa or Mount Moses, is the highest mountain in southern Sinai and one of the most spiritual places on earth. According to biblical accounts, it was here that Moses, amidst a violent storm, scrambled to the top of the mountain. Here the heavens are said to have opened as God gave Moses the 10 Commandments written on 2 stone tablets. To mark the site where Moses received the commandments, a Greek Orthodox monastery was built over 1,500 years later and dedicated to the Christian martyr, St. Catherine.
The monastery is known today as St. Catherine's Monastery. St. Catherine herself was born in Alexandria in the late 3rd century. She was renowned for her wisdom, for her intelligence, for her beauty, and for her wealth.
The monastery is the oldest on earth and has been a center of religious pilgrimage for over 15 centuries. Christians had fled here to avoid Roman persecution. And in 530 AD, the Emperor Justinian gave orders to build a vast fortification to enclose and protect an already sacred site. Towering walls enclose an area the size of a city block. Like a fortress, there was no doorway to enter. Until recently, the only way in was by a pulley that lifted any visitor up over the walls. Once inside, there lies a timeless miniature town from another age, a warren of ancient chapels and tiny courtyards. The monastery is one of the finest surviving examples of Byzantine architecture and houses a priceless collection of religious art and manuscripts. According to scripture, it was here that Moses' life would be transformed by seeing a miraculous vision of a burning bush. And a species of raspberry bush, Rubus santus, is still cultivated here by the monks.
The first name of the monastery was the Monastery of the Burning Bush, because this is the place where God appeared to Moses at the bush that burned without being consumed. It was here that Moses brought the children of Israel, and here that he received not only the revelation of the Ten Commandments, but the law.
Moses' story began in the new kingdom of Egypt. He was a Hebrew orphan, but grew up in the royal house. This was a time when Hebrews were held as slaves. But when Moses grew up, he was forced to flee the palace. He killed an Egyptian guard when he saw the cruelty inflicted upon his fellow Hebrew people. His life changed from prince to fugitive. And for 40 years, he wandered in the wilderness of the Sinai desert. According to the Bible, it was the burning bush that appeared as God's sign to him, and Moses' life was to change again. Charged with new purpose, Moses returned to the palace to persuade the Pharaoh to release his people.
There is a possibility that Ramses was the ruler during the Exodus. It takes place either 200 or 400 years before the building of the Temple of Solomon. If it's 200 years, Ramses is a candidate. You can't pinpoint this precisely.
The Pharaoh would not comply until Moses had unleashed 10 terrible plagues upon the country. The Nile turned to blood. Animals died and light turned to darkness. Only then did the Pharaoh relent. The Bible recalls how Moses led his people across the Red Sea, parting the waters to make their escape before bringing them crashing down, drowning the Pharaoh's army. After years in the wilderness with his followers, Moses would return to Mount Sinai, where God, having tested his faith, would give mankind the 10 Commandments. Since the time of Moses, the monks have carved 4,000 steps of repentance up the mountainside, allowing pilgrims a path to the top. When temperatures are low, as many as 1,000 tourists make the climb each night up what is considered to be one of the world's most spiritual landmarks.
The pilgrims that come here today are following in the footsteps of those who've come here for 17 centuries. It is gratifying to see people who come here as casual tourists and then become aware of the tremendous spiritual heritage that is here, and they come as tourists and they leave as pilgrims.
From this site, Moses is believed to have shown his people the way to their promised land, and the Jewish nation was born. Egypt had long had its own icons and mythologies. The most mysterious of all is the largest freestanding stone sculpture in the world. No one is certain who it represents or even who built it. Half human, half animal, the Sphinx has long been considered the strangest icon on Earth. At 60 meters long and 20 high, it guards the Giza Plateau beside Egypt's two largest pyramids. For centuries, the Sphinx has been seen as the key to life. Pharaohs have worshipped at its feet. Conquerors have knelt down before it. The Sphinx has been subjected to every test, but remains an enigma. Why was it built? Why are the tunnels inside it? Which king does it represent? What power does the Sphinx hold?
They call him Father the Terror. They're afraid of him. Can you imagine if the locals today are afraid of the Sphinx? The people at that time were also afraid. He's just here watching you all the time.
In ancient Egyptian art, the idea of fusing animal with human was nothing new. But this was the first time a human head was sculpted onto a lion's body. And in ancient Egypt, there was only one person who could be portrayed in such a way, the pharaoh himself.
The king being the manifestation of Egypt, he has to be virile, mighty, fearless, and powerful. So you have here the head of the king representing intelligence, but the body of a lion representing might and power.
The Sphinx stands in a vast U-shaped quarry before the Great Pyramid, built by Khufu, and the Second Pyramid, built by his son Khafre. It is thought to represent one of them. But why build a sculpture in the middle of a pyramid complex?
It's cut from actual rock. So this huge rock was standing there. So they decided to do something with it. And that thing would have been a huge statue that would manifest the king. And in the meantime, it would be a symbol for the sun god, Re.
But if the Sphinx manifests the importance of the king, why is its head so small in comparison with its long body?
The head is made of the hardest of the limestone and therefore was very good for sculpture. So somebody's got the idea when the shape has been left at some stage, hey, this might be an interesting design to make as a monument to the king.
But as the stonemasons began carving lower down, they ran into a soft layer of rock and hit a fissure. This poor stone may have forced the builders to extend the body. They then had to clad the bad area in a limestone casing. But it wasn't long after the Sphinx was finally completed that the entire statue would become buried beneath the sand for over 1,000 years. Thutmose IV rediscovered it and installed a 15-ton granite stela or inscription between its paws. Known as the Dream Stela, it recounts how as a young prince he fell asleep in the shadow of the Sphinx's head.
According to the stela, the Sphinx came to him and said, "My son, why do you allow this to happen to me? Uncover me and you shall become king of Egypt." So according to the Dream Stela, Thutmose IV uncovered the Sphinx and lo and behold, he became the next king.
But soon the desert sands were to consume the monument again before tomb builders came to the plateau.
First of all, you have to imagine now the Sphinx when it was covered with sand. So, it's all covered with sand, only the head is visible. The Greeks, by the way, believed that the Sphinx was like the statue, standing statue, and they were seeing the head. They couldn't imagine the body.
And because the body was hidden, tomb builders and treasure hunters have dug unknowingly into the Sphinx.
From all the times, people are curious. You see that during the ages, people tried to explore under the Sphinx. Maybe people believe there are hidden secrets. Today it's forbidden to make passages, but some centuries ago, nothing was forbidden. So you can come and make a lot of things here. Human activity is incredible.
This explains the tunnels, but there still remains the enigma. Which king does the Sphinx represent?
When you face the Sphinx, you find that it's in line with the pyramid of Khafra. and it's very close to the very temple of Khafra and to the causeway. So presumably it must have belonged to the same king.
But other Egyptologists disagree.
When you look at Khafra's pyramid, the normal thing would have been for the king to build a causeway at 90 degrees to the pyramid and bring it straight down to his valley temple. This was not done. His causeway had to take a swing over to the side over there because this quarry was already in the way. I personally think that Khufu was responsible because mainly the eyes are very wide open and very large. Another thing is the Nemes headdress that he wears, which is just a headcloth that was striped. But in his successor's reign, there is not a stripe to be seen.
The Sphinx may indeed represent Khufu, the builder of the other pyramid, the Great Pyramid, which stands at its side. Khufu's pyramid nearly bankrupted the country, and so the Sphinx could have been built by one of his sons, Djedefre, to restore national confidence and Khufu's status.
The idea that Djedefre, as a good son, makes a monument for his father, the Sphinx, to continue the cult of his father, the god. The image of the Sphinx, in fact, helped, because the power, the strength was given back. He's there watching the Egyptian people.
Whether the Sphinx bears the face of Khufu may never be decided. For comparison, the only surviving statue of the pharaoh is a tiny figurine just 3 inches tall. A small reminder of the pharaoh who would build the largest stone monument the world has ever seen. The Great Pyramid of Giza holds the #1 position as Egypt's top wonder. It's the oldest wonder of the world and has been standing for 4,500 years. It's the greatest tomb ever constructed and remains the largest stone building on Earth. It was built for the pharaoh Khufu in 2560 BC, and from that time to this, the Great Pyramid has remained an icon of world architecture.
The idea of a pyramid is very simple. The ancient Egyptians believed that life is eternal. They crossed from this life to the eternal life. But they had to prepare the abode. Now, it took the shape of a pyramid because this is connected with the sun god. Now, King Khufu was the first king to put amongst his titles Sa-Re. Sa-Re means the son of the sun god.
The pharaoh Khufu had been brought up with pyramids. His father had been a builder on a grand scale. And from the start, Khufu set out to construct a pyramid that was perfect. Firstly, the pyramid was aligned with the compass. The points where the North Star rose and set were divided to define true north. Then the base was leveled. Khufu's pyramid covers 13 acres and is level to within just 1 inch.
They did this using a rectangular grid of channels in the rock, which they could fill with water, and any protrusion sticking up above the water could be shaved off.
Once the base was marked out and the ground level, building could begin.
This is where they cut the stones to build the pyramid. To move them, they dragged them from here up a great straight main ramp up to the pyramid itself.
For the lower courses, the blocks weighed 5 tons or more. But as the pyramid grew, the weight of the stones reduced. In total, the workers hauled a staggering 2,300,000 stone blocks. For the first time in pyramid building, the blocks did not slope inwards, but were laid in horizontal courses. One was fitted into place every 3 minutes. But despite this pace, Khufu's pyramid would take 22 years to construct. Inside, the pyramid becomes a puzzle. From the entrance, a passage descends to the subterranean chamber carved out of the bedrock. It leads nowhere and leaves us with a mystery. Above, the Queen's chamber is a sealed room for a statue of Khufu, representing his Ka, or spiritual force. From here, there's a spectacular high-ceilinged passage.
The grand gallery leading up to the king's burial chamber was built using a technique called corbelling. This is a simple form of arch that the Egyptians excelled at. Each stone block is progressively stepped in until you reach the top, and it has the advantage both of reducing the span that they have to bridge and of giving the room a great feeling of grandeur.
Above this, high up in the pyramid, is the king's chamber, designed to be Khufu's final resting place.
It's incredible, it's incredible. It's entirely walled in granite, and these roof slabs were the biggest span ever attempted at that time, 4,500 years ago. The Egyptians were so worried about the weight of the slab and the fact it might collapse under its own self-weight that they built a series of voids or chambers above to try and hold the weight of the pyramid off this roof right here. And then right at the top, two great stones lean against each other like a V, and that takes the force, the weight of the pyramid, right down and guides it down these beautiful side walls. It's the most fantastic space I've ever been in.
Inside the stress-relieving chambers remain the graffiti of the workmen. One of them mentions the name Khufu, the only record of the pharaoh for whom this pyramid was built.
This is the last resting place of Khufu. Unfortunately, it was robbed in ancient times, and that's why it was broken at this tip. The funny thing is, when this coffin was measured, they found that was a fracture wider than the entrance there. So obviously, it was put here before the structure of the whole burial chamber.
There are other curious features, like two tiny shafts that run from this chamber towards the outer face of the pyramid. These are believed to have released the pharaoh's Ka, or spirit, to the heavens.
On their way out, once Khufu was in his sarcophagus, the priests and the engineers sealed the tomb by dropping 3 huge granite slabs down these great slots here, sealing it off forever.
Then the entrance at the other end of the Grand Gallery was also sealed. To get out, the engineers now had to climb down a near-vertical escape shaft, make their way back up the descending passage, past the blocking stones, and out through the entrance. Then the passages were blocked and the entrance sealed with a flapstone, indistinguishable from the pyramid casing.
Supposedly, nobody would have known how to get in. And even if they had done that, they would have found tons of blocks of stones blocking the ascending corridors. Every precaution was taken. But you know something? At the end, the pyramid was robbed. How did they do that? God only knows.
These 7 wonders all stood within the world's first empire and have inspired every civilization to follow them. Whether a natural site or a man-made construction, the 7 wonders of ancient Egypt will remain world landmarks for all eternity.